What's up guys, TopTierYugioh here, and now I know a lot of you guys are really tired of seeing Zoodiacs everywhere. Zoodiacs have been arguably tier 0 for the past maybe 6 or 7 months, and you just get tired of seeing the same deck, playing against the same deck, and just seeing the same deck splashed in every single other deck. And so today I want to give you guys some alternatives. I want to bring you guys the top 10 non-Zoodiac decks. And so number 1 is obviously Magicians. The new Pendulum Magicians that just came out in the Pendulum Evolution booster set are really strong. They have an extremely high ceiling. They're fairly consistent, and consistency is one of their major issues, but they have a lot of consistency cards in the deck like Pendulum Graphs, Dual Alliance, Wisdom Eye, Joker. It's not that the deck is inconsistent, it's that you just can't play if you do happen to draw less than ideal. But Magicians are again still the best deck I think that don't have Zoodiacs because the ceiling is just so high. I mean, you can do so much with really an average hand. I mean, you could get 2 rank 4s or rank 4 synchro, have scales for next turn, defense. It's insane. And then it's all of this on top of having Supreme King Zark. Definitely one of the best monsters ever printed, and this deck is the only one that can summon it. Number 2, True Dracos. And so True Dracos have Masterpiece, the True Draco Slaying King, which I think is probably the best main deck monster. So Zark is probably the best extra deck monster. Masterpiece is the best main deck monster, and this is the deck that summons it, and that puts it very high on this list. Now another really good thing about pure True Dracos is that it's pretty consistent. You have 3 diagrams, 3 terraformings, and a slew of other draw cards such as Pot of Desires, Card of Demise, Pot of Duality, and then many other consistency cards, on top of all the smaller True Draco monsters searching your engine, speller traps, and monsters. And so the deck is pretty consistent, can summon the best monster of the format, can disrupt your opponents, has a very efficient engine. You can recycle all of your cards back into the deck with Disciples, and it's just an overall very good choice. Number 3, True King Dinosaurs. Now this deck is actually very similar to Magicians in that it has a very high ceiling, and also can kill opponents very easily with Ultimate Conductor Tyranno. It has a little bit more tempo because of Tyranno, plus some of the rank 4s you can make like Laggy, Adolka. So I think it has a little bit more in the tempo department, but the problem with True King Dinos is their resource management, something that Magicians absolutely do not struggle with at all. But otherwise, True King Dinos are a very strong choice. Another option for them is to play the Yang Zing engine, which helps with their resource management, as well as giving them a little more tempo, but at the cost of some of the killing power that you would have in a pure True King Dino deck. But nonetheless, it is a great choice. Number 4, Wind Witch Invoked. And I wasn't a believer of this deck for a long time until I forgot what event I was playing at, until the guy summoned the Crystal Wing that couldn't be destroyed, and I realized my only out to it was like a Whiptail. That was awful, and then they can negate Whiptail, so making that Crystal Wing with the Wind Witches is very strong and hard to deal with. On top of the Invoked engine also being strong in and of itself, you can banish your opponent's rats out their graveyard, their other cards out the graveyard that they may need. You can summon Mechaba, which is hard to play around, and just in general, Invoked are hard to play around, Wind Witches are hard to play around. You combine them into one deck. It's a very good option. Now the only problem with the Wind Witch Invoked deck in my opinion is the fact that the Wind Witch engine requires so many brick cards. Because like you really only have 3 good cards, and then the other 3 cards are the bad cards. Because generally you play 3 of the level 3, 2 level 4s, and 1 level 1. The level 4 and the level 1 are both sort of bricks. And so it can be a little bit inconsistent, but I think if you draw well, you have a very good chance at winning games. And both engines are also very small, which gives you a lot of extra space to play other cards such as hand traps and actual traps. So it's a very strong deck. Number 5 is Paleozoics. And Paleos have always had a great Zoodiac matchup, and I think now that the format is slowed down a little bit, they won't be outpaced by Zoo as much as they were with a Fusion Substitute. Because if you remember, if you sort of look back at the history of Zoodiacs, like when Zoodiacs first came out, Paleo was a very strong contender in the meta. Like when Cory Roca won that YCS, it was because Paleo had such a strong Zoo matchup. Then everyone discovered Fusion Substitute. So for the next like month or 2, you were just able to outpace Paleo players because you could draw 6 or 7 cards, which is more than they could draw to stop you. And so it just wasn't a good matchup at that time when they had Fusion Subs. But now that Fusion Sub and Terratop are gone, the deck has slowed down. And in a much slower format, Paleo is probably one of the best decks. They're very good at card advantage, very good at tempo. It can be hard to kill opponents sometimes, but if the game draws out long enough, Paleozoics are one of the best grind decks in the game. Number 6 is Kozmo. And I think it's pretty arguable at this point. The Kozmos I think have a really good matchup against Zoodiacs because all of the pilots can dodge targeting, so you can dodge a Trident. and then all your, or most of the, not most, but some of the ships can't be destroyed, so they're also immune to Trident. I'm sorry, can't be targeted, so they're immune to Trident. Whiptail can be a problem. However, you do have Kozmo Town and Strawman and get your cards back from the banish zone, so getting them banished isn't the end of the world, and you really just have sort of an inherent advantage against Zoodiacs. And I think that's something that you want to take advantage of in most non-Zoodiac decks. So you want there to be some sort of mechanic or interaction that gives you an advantage over Zoodiacs, and that's exactly what Kozmos do. Now, Kozmos faltering that their ceiling isn't too high, like Magicians, Dinos, or some of the other decks that I listed before this. So their ceiling isn't very high, they're very linear, so it's easy to stop their plays if you can. And they also don't really have much recovery either, so they're sort of so it's sort of risky to play, but the reward can be very high if you can have a correct build that's consistent and is able to efficiently cycle your resources back from the banish zone from Whiptails and back onto the field so you can keep your engine going. But Kozmos are a very strong sleeper pick right now. Next we have Metalfoes, and so Metalfoes sort of keep up with the same trends of having a very high ceiling, but in general I think Metalfoes also have a good interaction against Zoodiacs, and the main thing that I want to talk about is Alcahest. And so the main interaction is that your opponent summons a zoo monster, you Alcahest to take it, and then they're probably staring at their My Bodies and their Shuffle Reborns, and they're, you know, they can't do anything against that because there's so many cards that protect Zoodiacs from being destroyed or get them from the graveyard. But there's nothing they can do really against having it equipped as a material or as an equip card. There's not really much they can do. It doesn't put it in the graveyard, and so it's very tough for them to play around. And so Metalfoes have a high enough ceiling in order to make a lot of plays going first. I think going second, because of the Pendulum Summon, they can play through their opponent's defense. And then on top of having Alcahest to take their opponent's monsters to keep them from using them again, you have Orichalc for disruption, you have Mithrilium that floats, so Trident generally isn't a problem, and I do think Metalfoes get a boost from Astrograph Sorcerer as well. And so Metalfoes I think are another really strong option. I forgot what number this is on right now. I think this is 8. Let's say 8. So number 8, we have Zombie Lightsworn / Minerva Sworn, whatever you want to call it. But that deck that has the Shiranuis, Lightsworn stuff to mill them to the graveyard, and a bunch of Synchro monsters and Xyzes with Brilliant Fusion. That deck is broken. I mean, it's almost impossible to break, and even though Lawn Mowing is at 1, I still think it's a really strong choice because of the fact that you have cards like Minerva, another Lightsworn card, you have Brilliant Fusion. It's very easy to get your cards into the graveyard, and then once you do get them in the graveyard, it's so hard to play around Fairy Tale Snow, Shiranui Sage, or Solitaire I mean, and then the other Shiranui card. Like, it's so hard to play around them. And I just think that deck has, again, a very high ceiling. It's not the most consistent deck, now that Lawn Mowing's at 1, but I think it's still definitely a good choice to play. Like, if you have it, then I would play it. But at the same time, Minerva is a very expensive card. It is going to be reprinted soon, but until then, you know, this is an expensive deck. Number 9, we have one of my favorite decks, Infernoids. And so Infernoids are a pretty decent deck in my opinion right now. The only problem is that they're not super consistent because most of the Infernoid cards are bricks. But the good thing about Infernoids is that you have extremely high power cards. Like, if you look at Void Feast, Void Vanishment, and Void Imagination, those cards are insane. Future Fusion is still very, very strong. If you can summon Tiero with like all of your Infernoid monsters, then that's really, really strong as well. But just in general, I think Void Vanishment and Feast are enough to pretty much win you a couple of games. The only problem is that when you're going second, a Trident can be an issue because Trident can just destroy your Void Vanishment, which can suck. Then also you have Ghost Dash, which can negate Void Vanishment and Void Feast. But one thing that does help Infernoids is that Zoodiacs are running so rampant that a lot of people are dropping Ghost Dash because Ghost Dash isn't very good against Zoodiacs, but Ghost Dash is very good against Infernoids, and so the more people that drop Ghost Dash, the better Infernoids can do. And so I think this is also a very good sleeper pick. And I know this is about non-Zoodiac decks, but I mean, if you were to play Zoodiac Infernoids, it's not a bad choice. But there are other variants of Infernoids that are good as well. And also, when I think the Megatins come out, we're getting Elder Entity Intis, which also makes Infernoids a lot better. So definitely a sleeper pick to sort of pick up cheap if you can get them cheap, and hold on to for a little bit. Play them at your locals, you'll have a great time. Number 10, another one of my favorite decks of all time, Burning Abyss. Burning Abyss is fantastic at resource management. You hardly lose your card advantage. You can OTK your opponents easily after a Farfa. You can summon a couple Dante's, attack for however much, and then Barbar for game. It's very easy to beat your opponents on a clear board. Beatrice helps you control the tempo. But just Beatrice in general is a top 10 monster of all time in my opinion. And again, it's sort of in line with the other things like Masterpiece is one of the best monsters. Zark is one of the best monsters. Dark Destroyer, really good monster. And then you have Beatrice. And so one thing I really like is that when you have a really good monster, whatever deck plays that monster has a very huge advantage over other decks. So this is really just another indictment of that. Beatrice is such a good card that whatever deck plays it is going to be a contender. Another thing that I like about it is that you can send Interrupted Kaiju Slumber to the graveyard. That can let you search Kaijus to out anything else. And there's so many other little Beatrice tricks. Like you can send Fairy Tale Snow to disrupt Zoodiacs. You can send Floodgates and then use Booby Trap E to set them on your side of the field so you can essentially search Floodgates. Beatrice is just such a good card. I think that it has to be on this list at some point. And now I know that I said this was going to be a top 10, but I did want to include one more deck actually that's a very good sleeper choice, very good deck, and that is Fluffals. And I wasn't going to include Fluffals at first, but while I was thinking of this list, I was on YGO Pro and I got 2-0'd by Fluffals, and I was like, I have to include Fluffals now. Because this deck is just insane. I think just the ability to go second and outright kill your opponents is very huge. And it's sort of like if your opponent doesn't have barrier and you draw just halfway decent. Like if you draw a playable hand in Fluffals and your opponent doesn't have barrier, then you will kill them. And so Fluffals are another good choice. But alright guys, this has been the top 11 non-Zoodiac decks. Let me know what decks you're playing down in the comment section below. If you want to get really spicy and really crazy, have some fun, you can mix some of these decks together like Metalfoes, Kozmo, or I don't know, Paleo Infernoids, which is actually a really fun deck. Magician, True Draco, Dinosaur, Fluffals. I don't know, maybe Dinosaur Fluffals is a good idea, but I don't know about that one. But you can mix these decks up and have a lot of fun as well. Again, let me know what decks you're playing down in the comment section below. If you're playing Zoodiacs, that's cool too. But these are all some other options that you could play. But if you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. I'd really appreciate it. It helps out the channel so much. But as always, guys, I will see you in the next video.
Remember that time, those cerulean tides, sapphire died.